Welcome to everybody. APLU is proud to sponsor this panel to consider, discuss the challenges, the opportunities, the successes of the LGBTQ plus community. We look forward to an excellent discussion. We've got a strong panel, and welcome again.
Great, thank you, Peter. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Wren. I'm a data analyst with APLU and also the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities. I am so honored and excited to be here with you all today to celebrate Pride Month with this truly amazing panel of university leadership. APLU institutions do amazing work to create inclusive spaces where queer students, staff, and faculty can thrive. And while the journey for equal rights and representation for the LGBTQ plus community is far from complete, I am very thankful for the role that our public universities play by being places where young people can show up as their authentic selves. So as we move throughout our discussion today, please do utilize the Q&A feature to submit questions to our panel, because we'll be sure to leave a few minutes at the end to answer any of those questions that you might have. So at this time, I'm going to introduce our fabulous panel today, starting with Anna Marie Kause. She is president of the University of Washington, where she has been a member of the faculty since 1986. She's a noted scholar on risk and resilience among adolescents and has received numerous awards for her research, as well as the university's Distinguished Teaching Award. Before becoming president in 2015, she served as the chair of the Departments of American Ethnic Studies and Psychology, as dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and as provost. Alan Shepard is president of the University of Western Ontario, which is near Toronto. Before moving to Western, he was president of Concordia University in Montreal and provost of Ryerson University in Toronto, all three of which are large public research universities. Dr. D.L. Stewart serves as the 2021 president of ASH, the Association for the Study of Higher Education. Over the course of his faculty career, he has focused most intently on the history and philosophy of higher education, institutional systems and structures that affect the post-secondary experience, as well as the success of racially minoritized and queer and trans students. Dr. Stewart is the incoming chair of the Department of Higher Education in the Morgridge College of Education at the University of Denver. And last but certainly not least is Lamar Richards. He currently serves as the student body president at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Lamar is studying a psychology and public policy curriculum where he specializes in organizational leadership and higher education policy. He also serves as the chair of the Commission on Campus Equality and Student Equity, where he works to ensure a more enriched academic experience for marginalized minority students. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists with our first question today. So panels, if you could just please discuss your journey of being an LGBTQ person in higher education, and maybe describing any challenges you might have overcome in that journey. And Dr. Kause, would you like to kick us off?
Well, yeah, when I was appointed UW president about 6 years ago, I was the first woman, the first Latina, and the first LGBTQ person to hold the office. I have to admit, I'm looking forward to the day when none of that is noteworthy, and when someone we don't think of people as being the first because, hey, it's just a commonplace. But for now, we have some lost time to make up for. And I think that representation and celebration of diversity in our ranks matters. And so I really appreciate that we are having this panel today, because I don't think that would have been the case as little as 10 years ago. But I think it's important to recognize, and that's something that I think it's really important for us not to carry on our shoulders in too big a way, but it's always there, is that representation cuts both ways. When a straight white man makes a mistake, no one says, oh, look, that just shows how they can't do it, or why they can't do it. Yet, I think that when you have a minoritized leader of any sort, we risk kind of being the avatar of the entire group. And I think that sometimes that can make us a little risk averse. And I think it's important for us every once in a while to kind of lighten up and remember, I don't carry on my shoulders the weight of everyone that hopefully will come after me. But at times it can be kind of a heavy feeling. And, and I think that that is one of the challenges. The truth is that over my lifetime, I've witnessed an enormous amount of progress in acceptance and inclusion of queer folks. I mean, I can remember when I applied to graduate school, or actually it was more when I applied for my first job, that I was like, it wasn't like I ever lied about who I was, but I wasn't going to say a whole lot until I got the job offer. Then I would ask questions about, well, what's it like to be lesbian, or what's it like to be queer in this environment? But it wasn't something that you were going to say when you were interviewing. I'm a psychologist. We were still talking about, homosexuality as being deviant. I mean, we studied it not as part of let's say, developmental psychology, which I teach. Instead, we covered it as part of abnormal psychology, which I also teach. And so, you were just a little bit more, like I say, I actually find it funny. I mean, when people describe me, first openly gay president, and which I think makes it very clear. I don't know, probably in my university, I may well have been the first, but we have to recognize that there have been queer people probably as presidents of universities all over universities forever. It's just that now the difference is that we are allowed to be open about who we are. I can remember in particular once having, very early in my presidency, there was a donor event at what I call the Pres-Res, the president's home. And when you leave, they put a portrait of you up on the walls. And there was all the portraits of all the previous presidents with their spouses on the wall. And this gentleman said to me, "Well, I bet you when they put up when they put up your poster, they'll assume that it was that your husband was the president." And I said, "They'll know it was a woman." And so I do look forward to when that goes up on the wall. Again, earlier in my career, I would have thought it impossible to call my partner my wife, or to be in a position of public leadership as an out lesbian. But I think that times have changed, but it is, there are still places where it can be a challenge. And I think we still have a lot more work to do when it comes to intersectionality, but I'll let others speak.
Great, thank you. Dr. Stewart, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. And I appreciate your response, President Kause, because my experience, is somewhat similar, but also very different as a Black, queer, and trans person. I ended up actually coming out, and this had to do with sort of the natural progression of my own identity, understanding, and articulation and journey, as I was already well into my career as a faculty member, already established in my field as a scholar, as a teacher, was as coming out as queer, as I didn't do them at the same time, coming out as queer right before I submitted my tenure materials, coming out as trans just before submitting my promotion materials to full professor 2 institutions ago. And in each of those times, it was a lot easier to come out as queer than it was to come out as trans.
Yes.
Heck of a lot easier. And even in a field that, in my field is higher education and student affairs, so I actually study colleges and universities, always say it's pretty meta. And I, in a field that espouses acceptance and is populated a great deal actually in leadership, very visibly queer leaders in the professional associations that I've been a member of, particularly over in student affairs side, not necessarily as much within ASH, but also struggling still with people being able to make the mental transition around my transness. And similarly, under President Kause, I pioneer. Just about everywhere I go, I'm the first trans person there. Just everywhere I go. I have been across the course of my career often the first Black person places. And so you put that together, I'm constantly finding myself as the first Black trans person to do anything in my field. And it's often exhausting to have that level of focus and spotlight, to have to deal with being the avatar, right? That whatever I do is kind of hyper visible, right? And at the same time, still struggling with visibility, particularly of my transness. So, and dealing also, I think the last thing I'll say, dealing also with people assuming that the only thing I have expertise on is around race, sexuality, and gender, right? That my skills and experiences are only relevant to issues of diversity, and particularly issues related to race, sexuality, and gender. And so being able to press out, even in my scholarship, right, beyond that, to talk about more, and even my personal choice has been to focus on issues of equity and justice in higher education, in colleges and university. That is my chosen focus of research, and it's not just about student identities and experiences, right? Which sometimes I think people have boxed me into, related to my identity. I think that's related to my identities, as well as where my earlier scholarship was focused, definitely in those places, but trying to become understood as a scholar who does more than that, I think has been a challenge for sure. And I'll go ahead and stop there and invite someone else to take the floor.
Yeah, thank you for that, DL. I mean, what you were saying clearly resonated with the rest of the panel as they were nodding along to what you were saying. So thank you for that. Lamar, would you like to go next?
Sure, and I'll just preface with the fact that it is raining really hard, and so my internet may be unstable, and so I apologize in advance for that. And that is the case during this. And I think my experience may be a little different than others that are part of the panel, just because I am a current student at UNC. But I think what surprises me, and is very unfortunate, which is that a lot of the sentiments that DL and Dr. Kause have shared is very similar to some of the things I'm dealing with right now. As the first Black openly gay student body president at the oldest public university in this country. I think, part of what I have to toe the line with, and I've always struggled with trying to say no about, is, not allowing myself to be tokenized or exploited because of who I am. And living in my most authentic self. I'm a public policy and organizational leadership double major now. But prior to changing my major, I was a physical science major. I won't name the major, but I was a major in a very difficult physical science to get into at Carolina. I came in as one of about 9 people of color in that program. In that cohort, about 27 people overall. Very selective program. And about right before COVID started, I was the last person of color left in that program. I wanted to leave. It's not something I really wanted to do. It wasn't really a passion of mine. But I felt I needed to stay, because if I left, there would be no representation. That's kind of, internal struggle I was dealing with, not because of who I was, but because of how I had been conditioned to think that I had to be there to maintain this quota or this sense of diversity. And part of that was because, I was being sat in front of an alum, and I was being asked, hey, Lamar, do you mind coming to this 12:30 meeting with donors? Or do you mind coming to this meeting with folks that are considering coming to the program or this recruitment meeting? At first, I was delighted to be in those spaces because I had never been exposed to those types of spaces where I was able to network and feel important. But very quickly, I realized that, me feeling important didn't really amount to how I was feeling tokenized and used. That because of who I was, not just being Black or being first generation or being openly gay, my collective identity somehow, gave this projection that I was okay with being exploited in this way. And that wasn't the reality. Not at all, nowhere close. So I think, me being elected by my student body was a big turning point for my university in particular, just because, it really showed that our student body is ready for change and is a bit more accepting than what we might have originally thought. But that doesn't mean that I haven't had my fair share of challenges, even when getting into this office. I do feel that I've been asked to do things already as the first Black openly gay student body president that my white straight predecessors haven't been asked to do. I've been, several times I've had to over-justify my existence in certain spaces, or over-justify why I'm in this space and why I'm, why my expertise or my experiences have allowed me a space in this at the decision-making table when I've been in spaces before and my white predecessors haven't had to do that. All right, I haven't had to present a strategic plan on diversity for the student body. Right, we haven't had to do that before, but because I'm Black and gay, right, I've been asked to do those things. And quite honestly, I think what DL said was really important. You told that really crucial line of visibility and being tokenized, because visibility in my eyes is always good. It's always important to highlight the experiences of the Black community, of underrepresented communities, of the LGBTQ community at large. I think it's really crucial to make sure that our stories and our triumphs and adversities are being pushed to the forefront. But I also think that quickly turns into tokenizing, and it quickly turns into, we want to tell your story, but we also want to profit and benefit from your story. And I think I'm at a point now in my career where I feel as if though, I don't just take any opportunity anymore to go in front of the media, go into a meeting, unless I'm assured that by telling my story, we learn from it. Not that we just benefit from it, but that we actually learn and institute change and policy from it. I think that's a big difference from who I was a year ago, even, where I was so quick to go to meet with a donor, meet with alum, to make sure that the program looked good. But instead, if I'm meeting with a donor or an alum, I'm telling the truth. I am the only person of color in this program, or I am the only open LGBTQ person in this program, and I'm being asked to go to 2-3 donor meetings a week, not because they think that I'm brilliant, or because I had an A in Physics 118, or because I tutored in one of the hardest classes on this campus. Not because of those things, which were true, by the way. It was because I was Black and I was gay. So I do, share those sentiments, and I appreciate that.
Thank you for that, Lamar. Alan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be with you. Thanks for inviting me. I came out in 1984. I was a graduate student at the University of Virginia. It was Charlottesville, Virginia. It was a small city in those days, very conservative. I'd been deeply closeted as an undergraduate at a liberal arts college in the American Midwest. And I would not have imagined as a grad student that I would ever be a university president. It wasn't really something I aspired to. Some days I still wonder, I might say. I came out in a time when the AIDS crisis was just hitting, and it was a very complicated time, and I got to say, I think we've made enormous progress. I get there's more room to grow, but it's a very different time now. By the time I left UVA, I was president of the Lesbian and Gay Student Union, as it was then called. And when I took my first faculty appointment, it was in Texas at a private university, and I was actually the first out person ever on the faculty. There, as it turns out, of course, there were lots of other gay and lesbian people. There were no trans people that I was aware of, but there were certainly other gay and lesbian people who would come to my office hours, and they would knock on the door and they would privately talk about the dilemmas of their lives and their personal circumstances. But I was the first out person. In recent years now, that university has had like an associate athletics director who was out. So like the world has changed. I immigrated to Canada about 20 years ago. And when my partner and I of now 27 years were filling out our Canadian taxes, our accountant said, in the United States, how do you indicate your relationship? And I said, indicate our relationship? Like it's a felony in the state of Texas. We don't put it on our tax forms. And I just realized like what a different world I had come to. And shortly after that, then gay marriage was made the law of the land in Canada. It's been a wonderful experience. I've been at 3 Canadian universities now as provost or president in Toronto, Montreal, and now in London, Ontario. And if you had asked my earlier self, will this be a huge problem for you? Will it be a liability? I would have for sure said yes, it'll be a high risk and so forth. And to my great surprise, it really has not been. Am I asked to do more and be more? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. You have to ask others. But I found it actually to be, in the end, an asset, because it has helped me think about difference more broadly and about empathy and compassion and social justice, all things that matter to all of us on this call, I'm certain. When I was being interviewed to be president in Montreal, it's Montreal, it's a great liberal city. But one of the search committee members being told at the end that they were going to pick me and they were going to appoint me to be president of Concordia University. One of the people said, what do you mean he's gay? Like, he didn't act gay, like, shouldn't he have told us he was gay? Like felt kind of like cheated. But that was it. That was the extent of it. And I have to say, the barriers were really in my own mind as much as anything else when I was an undergraduate, just the absolute fear that, people would find out, how I would be rejected, all of that stuff that many, many gay, lesbian, trans people struggle with then and still struggle with today. I was really interested in this NFL player who came out yesterday who said he'd been thinking about that day for 15 years. I think many people would say that. And now I'm at one of the premier research institutions in Canada, and my partner and I are been together 27 years. We have a couple of kids that we've adopted, and we live in the president's residence. And I keep having to come out every now and then, right? Like the groundskeepers come and you say, "Oh, that's my partner Steve," or and so it's kind of a never-ending process, I suppose. But again, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you all for sharing a little bit more of your background and journey. I'm going to switch now to our first question, and our first question for you all today is, what do you believe is the role of inclusive programming, messaging, and queer visibility on campus, and how could that impact the experience of queer students? And Dr. Stewart, I'll turn to you first.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I was remiss earlier to not acknowledge the land I'm coming from here. I am in what is now known as the state of Colorado and Northern Colorado, which are the ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and people. I appreciate being here with you all this afternoon, morning, depending on what time zone you're in. Because I am a scholar that has studied student identity and student development in colleges and universities, I think this question is really important. The first level of why this is important is about existence, right? It connects to what our student body president Lamar said in his previous comments, that that programming, that messaging that acknowledges that queer and trans people exist is critical, right? And exist on campus and exist in the world. And that programming helps to send that message. I think the other thing that it does, particularly when it draws on and includes LGBTQ faculty and staff, is that it provides an opportunity for students to see what it means to be a queer trans adult, right? That there is life, that there is possibility beyond your undergraduate career, that you can go and do other jobs, other positions. I think it's really important that programming, when it includes those who are not students on the campus, that it includes community members as well, right? So that people can see, our students can see a variety of career paths and opportunities available to them, not just what's in the academy, although that could be great too. But I think about what Laverne Cox has called possibility models, right? And the opportunity for students to see possibility models on their campus and in the community is critical. Okay, is critical. So I'll stop there and allow others again to pop in.
Yeah, no, I'll just add that I think that sometimes some of us, I'm from, liberal Seattle, which is actually a fairly comfortable place to be queer. that that's not the case for all our students. Some of our students, come from areas and for all the progress that we've made, there's a few things that make me nervous because sometimes, there's steps backwards that happen and we've gotten very close to that. And so, as well as some kids come from families that have been accepting and have been taking them to, gay and lesbian and, and queer and trans meetings when they were kids. And there are others whose parents are still kind of appalled about who they are. And so I think it's just really important that for us to be aware that experiences, vary widely. And I think that it is really important for, we have a queer center. I know a lot of campuses do, and to have programming that is inclusive and that is targeted towards, particular groups. What I'm concerned about now more is not so much universities. I think most universities are there, although there are noteworthy religious, exceptions. But that, now, I came out in graduate school, and that was not that uncommon. And I don't just mean came out, I mean came out to me. And that was not that uncommon. Now we really see, kids, and I think it's wonderful, coming out in elementary school, certainly in junior high and high school. And I think that we need to think about how can we partner to help them do more inclusive programming there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was, my grandmom, who, is responsible for raising me as a child, she's always say something like, because I used to really love show and tell as a child. And she was always say, well, how can you be something that you've never seen? And the reality is, where I'm coming from in small town Winsboro, South Carolina, where I grew up at, where the average household income is about $15,000 a year, population is a little less than 26,000. There was really little, if any, visibility of LGBTQ citizens and that community in Fairfield County. And so for a while, I felt like, well, even though I'm feeling this way about like who I may love or how I may be, that if I come to fruition with this, or I come publicly out with this, that I'll be too different for my community to truly embrace who I am. So it wasn't until I went to boarding school where there was a bit more visibility of that community, where I felt this is a space I want to come out in because there are people here who I feel can embrace me. And it wasn't that my community was not loving or were not supportive. It's just that I did not see it. I think that line is so important because in reality, there are many things we don't see we end up becoming. Like maybe I never saw an academic in my family, but I become one. But at the same time, visibility is so important for those young generations of students who do not have that, who don't have access to it. And it becomes more of a mandate for universities to say, well, we need to make sure we provide our students with LGBTQ center or make sure we celebrate Pride Month. And it kind of stops there. Inclusive programming isn't just a 1 day or a 2 day or a 1 month thing. It has to be ingrained in the foundation of everything that the university does or that the K through 12 institution does. And I say that because you don't know how often the smaller things really impact students. And for me, that has come in the form of sometimes I've had an academic, a faculty member in my Psych 101 class come to me and say, Lamar, I know you're in summer session 1, but it's also Pride Month. As a Black gay man in this country, this was last year, right now with everything going on, are you okay? Do you need anything? Do you need an extension? Would you like to sit down for a coffee and chat? Those small things really matter. And I responded, I said, I appreciate that. I'm curious, what made you ask that? And she said, well, my department, the psychology department here, went through an inclusive language and student development seminar centered around LGBTQ students. I said, this is interesting to me because I've been in physical science classes and other classes that are really tough on the students. And they never kind of stopped to ask students, how are you? And that small thing, that small note, it was a 2-line sentence note, made such a big impact on me, a person who was already out. I can only imagine the impact it would make on students who are still struggling to find that visibility. And so I genuinely am supportive always of toying the line between, as I said earlier, visibility and tokenizing, but making sure that we're represented, not just in not just in higher education, but also in K through 12, because it was seen for so long as, if a child who's in 5th or 6th grade is thinking that maybe they are gay or maybe they aren't who everybody's telling them to be, it was seen as something to be shunned or something to be turned away. And then you have the fact that there's added identities. And I tell my friends all the time, if you're white and gay and you're Black and gay, you experience two different, entirely different worlds. If you are Black and trans or you're white and trans, your collection of identities truly shape your experiences in this world. And so I think that, I appreciate the comments that have been shared so far, because truly and honestly, as I was listening to you all, it was resonating with me about how I grew up and where I'm from and kind of the struggles I had there about where to come out, where I felt comfortable, most comfortable. And that entire experience was shaped by visibility for me.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comment, Lamar. And I think that the comment you made about just asking, how are you? Like, that simple question can just be so transformative. So thank you for sharing that. And it also leads us perfectly, beautifully, actually, into another question we have around how do we prepare our students to enter the workforce, right? They're only with public universities for a short number of years. And so we recognize that many institutions foster inclusive environments, but some workplaces might not be as committed to that goal. So how can we prepare our queer students to transition to the workforce? And on the flip side of that coin, encourage our partners in the workforce to better embrace their queer students. If Dr. Kause, would you like to go first?
Yeah, no, I can definitely, I do think that that's a larger issue, a larger question, in the sense of that, that I do think that we work very hard to have inclusive environments on university campuses. Not that we're perfect and that we don't, that there aren't still problems, but but sometimes that, that's not always the case in workspaces, although I do think that more and more workplaces are also looking for example, I've been on panels at Microsoft where they not only are doing things in terms of queer, but also disability, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that more and more workspaces are realizing that, quite frankly, in a selfish way, and selfish is perfectly fine with me if it gets you to the right place, that if they want to get the very best employees, that they need to be inclusive. But there's some things, for example, if you're going to attend a work a fair on our campus, or if you are going to post on any of our career boards, et cetera, you have to agree to our policies. So at least they have to agree to non-discrimination. So if they are a workplace that discriminates, or which as we know, some places are allowed to do so, then they can't. And we also help our students know, because there are a bunch of different rankings out there, that they should know something about the environment at the workplace that they're going, to decide whether it's a fit for them or not. I don't feel like it's my place to tell someone, they have to make their own assessment as to what they are willing to, some people might say, okay, this isn't, this is not that inclusive a place, but I'm getting paid well, and I'm gonna, they have to make their own choices. Although I really do, and I'm a psychologist here, think that, and I would advise anyone to think twice about going to a workplace where you can't be fully yourself, because I just think that the amount of stress that causes does not allow you to do your best work, even if you think you can manage it. I would suggest to someone that they think twice.
Matt, could I just add, I agree with all that. I do think that leaders in whatever position we're in have a special responsibility to be visible. And particularly if you're a university president or provost or dean and so forth, you often interact with private sector leaders. And I try always in a sometimes subtle way to make sure they know they're talking to a gay university president. Not that I want to be the gay university president. There are a couple of others in Canada, not many, but I want them to, like, for some of them, it will still be a novel experience for them. And I want, as I talk to them about their own work environment, obviously we can't dictate what kind of environment they establish, but I always try to be sure to talk about the importance of diversity and the importance of how that makes you a stronger organization, whatever it may be. And just the representation in itself is a bit of a move. And I have to say that, and maybe my recent work experience is in Canada, not in the US, but I have to say that most of the senior leaders that I interact with, they've already gotten this. What they privately think, I'll never know, but the companies in Canada, they're very alert to this, and they're working hard on it.
I could jump in with another piece here, and it goes back to emphasizing the need to kind of, I might say, screen who's coming on campus, who's going to participate in your career fairs in terms of their policies and their stated willingness. But I think it really needs to go beyond that. And I speak particularly from the experiences of trans students in career fairs and career settings, that we need to do work through our career centers with potential employers around the norms and assumptions that play a role in what is considered to be professionalism as a space, what it means to be professional as a space where oppression, discrimination, and bias still happen, despite what is said and what's written on the paper, okay, what's put on the website. How do we think about Dean Spade's germinal essay on, it's called Be Professional, where he's contesting, and Dean Spade is a trans scholar actually at the Seattle University, where he's contesting the assumptions about what professional dress looks like.
Yeah.
Right? And there are ways that particularly impacts trans students who are going on the job market. Trans and genderqueer students who present and show up, and other people look at them and say, wait a minute, what's wrong here? What's wrong here, right? I can't bring you into my company because you don't fit what it's supposed to look like to be a member of my company. And it's those norms and tacit assumptions that need to be zeroed in on.
Agreed.
To be exposed and to be disrupted, and to say, if you're going to engage with our students here, we really need you to flip the mode, right? And break the mode rather on what you are assuming is necessary for a student to be able to, a person to be able to effectively do the job that you're posting, right? And it's about advocacy for our students. It's an advocacy standpoint, right? That is critical. How, as institutions, are we advocating for our students? Okay, and doing that actively and not just passively. I think we have the opportunity to play a vital role, okay, in opening up and dismantling, okay, oppression and structure that's systematized, right, or systemic rather, in these workplaces, okay, around the whole LGBTQ spectrum of identities, but particularly when we come to trans students, right?
I agree.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Stewart. And that actually leads us perfectly into our next question, because I'm aware that I hope we have many allies on the call who might not themselves identify as a member of the LGBT community, but want to learn how to better support the queer community. And so thinking specifically of those folks, what are some things that you wish allies could do better as they support their students, their colleagues, who are in the LGBTQ community, and particularly including those with intersectional identities. Dr. Kause, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, no, I was, you know, I was thinking for a bit because I you know, I do think the whole ally thing can be, you know, why don't I let someone else go first? You know, I'm really, you know, it's a tough question because to some degree, my initial reaction is stay out of the way, but I don't mean it that way. But I at times find that there are folks, as you know, I think as Lamar was talking about, that their alliedness ends up feeling very tokenizing. And so, you know, trying to find that right space. I mean, you want people, I think that probably the most important thing I can say that I want to see in allies is I want them to speak up when they do think, when someone, for example, you know, says something that's homophobic or transphobic or whatever. You know, it's certainly a lot better if the first person who speaks up is an ally and someone that is not a member of the community. So I'd say that that's number one, is that you want them to speak up and to speak up for the rights of everybody. So I'd say that's the number one.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
the jokes aren't funny. I think that sometimes there are still a series of, you know, wink, wink, nod, nod jokes that just aren't funny.
Yeah, and I'll chime in there. I think, and we have this conversation all the time on our campus, especially through our Office of Student Life and Leadership and through our student organizations. And one of the things that, you know, I like to present on, that I'm grateful to present on, is, you know, what we call setting the agenda for allies. And one thing that I think can be done better and should always be known is for an ally to understand their role in a certain situation. And sometimes that is a backseat role that maybe only you as an ally can open this space for a member of underrepresented community or a member of the LGBTQ community. And maybe that's your role, to get this person at the table, not to go in and overtake the conversation in a way that silences them in an oppressive way that continues to perpetuate those same oppressive standards. And I think, right, to me, I'm always asked, what is the goal? How do you know if we've made progress? And I say that, well, if issue that is important to the LGBTQ community or the Black trans community specifically, or et cetera, is discussed without one of us putting it on the agenda, without one of us being in the room, that's how you know we're making progress. We have a mostly white male administration here at UNC. And so if you're telling me that you're discussing Black issues, or if you're discussing issues about the LGBTQ community without one of us being in the space, or it's coming up to you naturally, that's how no progress is being made. And while for visibility and our respect, sure, it's good to have us in that space. But as an ally, I shouldn't always have to be, or rather, as the individual in question, I shouldn't always have to be the one to introduce the idea of the LGBTQ community, or introduce the idea of the Black trans community, or of the queer community. That should come naturally for all of us, but more importantly, for you as an ally, because that's not one of your identities. But as a steward of good leadership, even if it's not your identity, it should be your priority. And that sometimes can get conflated and confusing for allies because they don't know how to address, to make certain things their priority. And I think that that needs a little bit of reform there. You know, how do we have the same priorities and shared priorities, even if we don't share the same identities? And how does that play into setting the agenda for our meetings, our strategic planning, and in the direction our university chooses to go?
Yeah, I think I was having a little bit of trouble with that question, and I'll just, you know, make this, you know, that I do think that one of the things about being a university president, or in this kind of position of power, is that so often everything that you are gets erased. So, you know, you were talking about, you know, an administration. Your administration is mostly, you know, we have actually quite a bit of diversity in our administration, including our, our dean of undergraduate education, our dean of graduate education, and our vice president of student life are all Black. And yet, when we're standing up there in those positions, I sometimes joke, only half joke, that when I retire, I'm going to call my memoir Confessions of an Administrator, How I Became a Straight White Man.
Well, I look forward to reading that, Dr. Kause.
But I couldn't agree more with you, Lamar, about that. It's so important for. I think the most important thing that allies can do is advocate. And just to get back to DL, that I do think that we've made a lot of progress on queer issues, but I think trans issues are not anywhere near as far along. And we finally did get policies through that people can use can use the name, that their preferred name on everything, but there's some financial aid forms that we can't do that on, but on everything else in terms of the classroom, et cetera. I think we've done a lot of work on preferred on preferred pronouns, et cetera, but I think that things aren't as far along there, including in the workplace.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to move into our last question before we turn to Q&A. We've gotten some really wonderful questions so far, but if you do have any last questions, please utilize the Q&A function for those. So our last question is, if you could travel back to a time before you came out, what is one piece of advice that you'd give yourself? And that was Alan's favorite question, so I'll turn to him first.
Thank you, Matt. I think the advice from my old self would be around intersectionality. So I was the first in my family to go to university, growing up in a farm family of very modest means. And what I didn't understand then was how much your situation, where you're born, the family into which you're born, and all of that, how much it shapes your worldview in those early years. And so coming out and all the rest of it, figuring out you're trans, whatever it may be that you're experiencing, I would have had no sense then of how the complexities of that experience would be dictated so much by the environment into which I had been plunged. And I think I would have tried to escape the upper Midwest and gone somewhere else sooner than I did. So nothing against the Midwest, but it was very tough growing up in a farm family where you're wanting to go to university and struggling with all these issues. So I think it's for me, it would have been the recognition of how much my worldview was shaped, and then my responses to figuring out that I was gay. I mean, as Anna Marie was saying, like, she came out to herself in graduate school. That's certainly my experience too. I think it's different now for young people, but there was no visibility. Like, you went to the library to find out books, and they were all in the in the section on like your disorders. There was no there were no role models really. They're all hiding, which gets back to the visibility piece again.
Other pieces of advice that you give yourself?
I mean, I think in some ways I'd tell myself to relax a little. I mean, I really was, I think as Alan was saying, I'm 65 now, so, think about when it was that I was coming up, that, that everything was that I really did, part of my parents' fear was that, my life would be filled with anxiety. I'd never find someone to love me, or that, I'd have to choose between career and love, et cetera. And, just the whole, all the anxiety around it. And I'm not trying to blame me. It's society that put that anxiety on me. But, I wish I could have just, relaxed a little bit and felt more comfortable with who I was earlier in life.
This is a good question. For me, as I said earlier, when I came out, my mom and I, we're best friends, and we've been that way for a long time. I'm very grateful for her wisdom and insight. And one of the things that I would tell myself is to, my younger self, is not to be afraid to educate people. Because, when I was coming out, it's not that my family, my mom, my brothers didn't know, didn't love me for who I was, or that they were somehow against me or hated me. They did not know how to support me. They genuinely didn't know what I needed, what forms of support that I needed as a Black, young, gay man in such a close-knit and small community, which is why I didn't come out until boarding school, where the LGBTQ community was a bit more visible. And I took such an angry position at that time because I was, afraid. I also was disappointed and upset that I wasn't receiving the support that I thought I needed. And later down the road, I figured, well, maybe I should just tell them, this is what I need. This is how I think I'm best supported. This is how I think we should do this as a family. And very quickly they were like, yeah, let's do this then. Let's go to this seminar. Let's go to Pride in New York or wherever. Let's do these things as a family. Because it's not that we didn't want to do them, we just never knew how to support you. And now, look, in retrospect, I wish I would have taken, the opportunity to educate my family and others more, because now I feel that 75% of the problem is that people are not educated on what, not only the LGBTQ community, but also on the differences with the Black LGBTQ community, the Black trans community. We're also very different, but we're all still a part of the same community. And, that's just for me. I wish I would have, taken the time to educate my family.
I love that point, Lamar.
Yeah, it's, when I think about my younger self and I think about elementary, high school, college self, who had not a clue that, high school me would not have at all predicted, me. This was not on in 20 years, I'm going to be like that. That was not on that cue card. But I think when I got to college and even later in high school, questions started to form. But and there were spaces on, it was a student organization. There was not at my undergrad at that time a institutional supported Pride Resource Center type of space at all. And so I wish there were, in the students organization was all white. And so I wasn't gonna go there. That just was not was just not going to happen because of the issues of white supremacy and racism that are within white LGBTQ communities, right? That's just real. So I don't know what I would tell my younger self. There were not people of color, queer and trans role models at my institution in undergrad. So my younger self, I think I would tell them that it's okay to take the journey. And it's okay to not have it figured out until you're in your mid-30s.
No, that's something, I work with kids all the time, and it's so interesting because, when we look back at our lives, it all makes sense. But when we're looking forward, we're clueless sometimes. And I think that that's the hard part about being young, is that, that you don't know what's next. And I think sometimes, particularly, when we come from marginalized identities, when you're first generation students, when all of that, and we don't have the role models and we don't know where the support's going to come from, it can be very, not knowing what comes next and what that's going to mean can be very, very uncomfortable.
And I guess, so the encouragement, I think, is that it's okay to wait. It's okay to not do it right now. It's okay. We often look at, and I think this is part of the issue that I see happening in colleges and universities, is that there's an expectation that, as President Kause said, coming out to yourself right? It's supposed to have already happened before you finish your undergraduate career, right? That you should have already figured it out by the time you hit 22. So we're not going to provide resources, opportunities, supports for people who are employees now, So when I look at, institutions that have, they're doing opportunities for people to put their chosen name, to put their chosen pronouns, the pronouns that feel authentic to them in places, in systems, in records, but it's not there for their employees.
It is for us. But yeah.
That's great. But at many institutions, it's not there for their employees. I had to sort of I was the first one to say, excuse me, I need to change my name. And nobody knew how to do it. I want to change my gender in my employee profile. Huh? Wait, what? There's 5 different systems you have to go through in order to change your name as an employee on this institution. So there's, I lost track of went off on a bunny trail. But I think there's, the need to create systems so now I'm not talking to my younger self, I'm talking to institutions, to create systems and processes that are open enough, that are flexible enough, that are capacious enough to recognize that identity is a journey.
Yes, no, I think that's really important. Like, again, I think that universities are often the most diverse place that people have ever been in, because we grow up in such segregated areas. And again, I do think it's important. You're absolutely right that, particularly in these liberal meccas, there's this sense of, oh, by the time that, they got here at 18, they've got it all figured out. And that, for different people, the journey happens at different points. And, I still know of people, who come out after their first divorce. And they're in their 30s or 40s, and life takes them in a different direction. And we need to remember that it doesn't all happen smoothly and clearly for everybody.
I can think a deal about your comments about systems. When we were adopting our kids and we went to enroll them in the Toronto public schools, you fill out these forms like the mother's name and the father's name. And we were like, whoa, this doesn't work, and the forms kept getting sent back to us because there was two male names and a whole series of things like that. I think the Canadian universities sector has been quite sensitive to the issue for students and increasingly also for employees, particularly around changing names and so forth. So it's just all a journey.
Yeah, I really appreciate those comments about, it's okay to not have it figured out. I did not come out until after I graduated from undergrad. And so that really resonates with me as, it's great to support those students who are part of that community, but we have to recognize that they might not realize they're in that community at that time. And so that's a great kind of caveat that you called out. So thank you for that. So we're going to turn to some audience questions now. We've gotten many wonderful questions, and one that has gotten a couple of upvotes is around international students and their specific needs. So what sorts of efforts have you all seen on your campuses to support LGBTQ international students, given that they might come from countries that might add complexity to their wants or needs?
Yeah, we have a really good student center for our international students, and issues of intersectionality of various sorts are issues that do come up and that sometimes do get complicated, because as we were talking about, just like in this country, there are real differences by areas of countries. There are some countries where, being LGBT is in fact, against the law. And, so that gets, and we don't want to, the hard part is that on the one hand, we definitely want to support those students. On the other hand, we don't want to get involved in internal political battles of that country. So I think what's, how we tend to handle it is, in this country, we're not going to start making comments on your country and how things are done there. But here at this university, we are going to support this. And if you're going to be here, you need to. But we do have a student center just for international students and different students. Some students prefer to go to, it's not like there's one place that everyone, so that, for example, if you are, let's say, I don't know, South American, Black and gay, you can choose to go to our African American Center. You can end up going to our Q Center. You can end up going to our International Center. And sometimes students choose one over the other. Sometimes they go to all three.
I would add that we do have an obligation, I think, to be culturally sensitive. So students coming from, say, the Middle East, where you can be executed for being gay. Yeah, this is a serious issue. So we have to be cautious in how we help them. Some of them really want kind of on the down low, kind of, quite quiet support. And I think we have to respect that. I think we can't superimpose on them this North American, be out and proud for them, might get them killed back home. And if not by their government, maybe by their families, really negative experiences. So I think we're trying to be super sensitive. If they want to be out and proud with other people, awesome. But if they also want the quiet psychological support, social support, and I've interacted with a number of students from the Middle East, particularly. And when I was in Montreal, we had a really tragic case of a Chinese student who was out and made some fatal decisions and lost his life for it. And it was so I'm always very, very aware that it's just high risk for some students in other countries.
Yes. Yeah, and I think it's important sometimes that we educate students in this country, because sometimes they do put pressure. I mean, some of these students are, in fact,
Right.
Let's say, sexually active in this country.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's really important that doesn't get that's not open. And sometimes they get pressure from students in this country to be open, because if not, and I think that it's important that we do that level of education. I mean, it's one of those things that, all the progress that's been made, there are some invitations to other countries, particularly right after I became president, when the fact that, that I was lesbian was in, all the newspapers,
Right.
where I just felt like I couldn't visit.
Right. I've had a couple of those as well.
The last thing I want to say on this point is, or the thing I want to contribute on this point is emphasizing and reinforcing what President Shepard said about visibility. And visibility is a false signpost often, particularly when it's used as the height or the evidence of a mature identity development. The other piece is what is happening in your counseling centers on your campus. Because wrestling with these issues can be traumatic, can tear you apart. What resources are available to competently help support international students who are queer and or trans go through that experience and make sense of it and manage it and decide how they want to deal with it? What's happening in your counseling centers? Do you have people who are who have competence in being able to help support those students? I think that's a critical part of the conversation.
That's such a powerful point, Deal. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, I think that is incredibly important, because for some of them, it's like partly because they've been in countries where it's not visible, et cetera, they do start struggling with it because all of a sudden they become aware of it, and they do need a lot of support.
So I think we'll turn now to our last question from the audience. We had a really interesting question come in sort of around academic freedom and free speech, and how do we support students that might have experienced harmful rhetoric on campus. So for instance, a student whose chosen pronouns are not being honored, or chosen name, and things of that nature. So and we've had a couple of questions come in about sort of shifting an institutional culture towards a culture of acceptance. And so if you could sort of speak on how we sort of grapple with de-siloing the institution to sort of shift the needle in that direction, I think that'd be a great kind of point to end us on.
Well, we do have some tools where if a student has experienced harassment, discrimination, et cetera, they can make a report anonymously or in person and we can follow it up. You know, obviously, if it was a faculty member who wasn't using the correct pronouns, et cetera, we would talk to their chair, et cetera, and we would work with this faculty member and make sure that they did. What's harder is when it's student to student. And that can be a bit more difficult, especially when it is not as clear cut. We certainly have a student conduct code, et cetera. But, you know, there's a, like I say, there's a difference between overtly discriminating and what I would call more the microaggressions, which can still be incredibly, can still have an incredible effect. And I think there it's more that's where I think places like the Q Center, you know, places like our Ethnic Cultural Center, you know, making sure that there's places where students can really be, you know, feel that they can be authentic and fully accepted on campus.
And I wonder, you know, I see, and I appreciate everything you've just said. I think the free speech, and Matt, you said there was a free speech element in one of those questions. I think the default to free speech is a cop-out, to be quite honest, and to be blunt. The conversation needs to be about how do we maintain the integrity of our campus climate and what our campus culture is, and protect students and support students, whoever they are, across the entire campus. A student should not have to run to an identity cultural center in order to feel safe on our campus. Because if that's the only safe space on campus, that's an issue. Okay, that's an issue. How do we help support and create a culture and sustain a culture on our campuses where that kind of behavior just doesn't fly? How are we helping students, faculty, and staff who are not members of the community to stand up as bystanders to these things? Because there often are other people who are witnessing this. Okay, how do we help develop accomplices? It's the word I prefer to allies. How do we help develop accomplices who will disrupt and say, this isn't okay here. You may not be able to get penalized through a campus conduct system, but let me tell you something, this is not going to fly. And you're going to find yourself on the outskirts among us as your fellow students, among us as your fellow colleagues. Right? So beyond the department chair, how is the rest of the department coming in to put pressure on that faculty member to say, this is not okay, yo?
What I'm saying is when it's a faculty member, there is no question, but that they will use preferred pronouns. There is absolutely no question, but we do have students on campus, and I think that they exist, who do, we've talked about other countries, et cetera, you know, who do, I mean, look, I can tell you.
With all due respect, I think my point still stands.
Okay.
Right? Is about the campus culture and how do we create and maintain a campus culture that exerts that pressure and that force in and of itself without having to resort to campus conduct systems, right? It's about a transformative justice conversation. And how do we create that culture to do that? So that's what I'm saying.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I mean, we do bystander training. We do that work. I'm just going to say that it is not. Students may encounter other individuals who do believe that homosexuality is a sin, et cetera. That will happen.
I recognize that. I'm not saying it won't. That's the entire point I'm making, is that happens.
Yep.
Okay. And how do where's the role of the culture of the campus? Lamar?
I wanted to just chime in on that. I think part of what you're mentioning is a part of a larger problem, which is the universities and institutions' quickness to use the word reform and other words like this and reckoning, but not actually meet the challenge of what those words mean. And so when we talk about things like reporting, things like that, let's be clear. The research is clear and evident. Black people and people in the LGBTQ community are less likely to report crimes and things like that. And that is not because they are not happening. It is because there's a system of oppression embedded within the foundation. So when we're talking about reform and reckoning, I think what both of you are saying is important. What really needs to happen is the institution in question has to own up to it and say, we're going to rewrite the entire foundation. Reform does, and this is my opinion, reform does not work. Because what you're trying to say is we have a foundation of oppression, we're going to build on top of it and build something new on top of it. Yet recognizing that the foundation of oppression that got us here in the first place is still very much there. And so when we're talking about, because I've been through this personally, right? Wanting to report, because I had things said to me. I mean, as you can imagine, the first Black openly gay student body president of the country's oldest university, I've had things said to me by my peers, even by some staff or colleagues on the board of trustees. And right, I think, well, should I report this? But so many times my peers come and tell me, Lamar, I went and reported this to the Office of Equal Opportunity and Compliance, and I was made to feel like I am the reason. I was the reason that this happened to me or that this occurred, right? That is cultural. It's embedded within the culture of the university, of the institution, and part of our commitment to larger change or to this reckoning has to be, how do we undo the foundation? And that's a question I don't hear it being asked enough from our leaders and our administration and others in this, is there has to be a commitment from everyone. Because in a scenario where it's a faculty member, right, I have to wonder, you knew this was this was the standard to address this student by their preferred pronouns, right? At some point, which I think we're trying to get to here, we're not going to allow you a second chance to disrespect another student or to go into further this culture. And from a student's perspective, that's how you build trust, because a lot of this is trust-based and students don't have trust in these institutions to do the right thing because the foundation is evident.
Thank you all. That's such a great discussion. And unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes left, so we don't really have time to further it. But Alan, I just want to give you just a minute for a closing thought if you'd like before I wrap us up.
Sure, thank you. I was thinking further what you said, DL, that it is about culture. I think the thing where we often get hung up is how do you make that culture and how do you enforce its standards, and that the culture is actually multiple cultures. I think the President Anna Marie is saying is that when you have the mixing of different cultures, then you have these kind of contested spaces in which we need more sophisticated tools, let's say, to try and make our way through those difficulties. I'll just, so that's my contribution to the lively conversations that's happened. To round out, Matt, I've learned a lot and really enjoyed this, and I thank APLU for sponsoring it and encourage the organization to do more.
Thank you. This has been good.
Thank you all. So we're right at time. So I just want to thank all of our fabulous panelists one last time for sharing so much of your wisdom. I've learned so much today, and I'm just so thankful to get to come together with you all. And I also like to thank all of our attendees today for giving us the past 75 minutes of your time. And I hope that you're walking away with some really great thoughts to take back to your campuses. And so with that, I will just thank everyone one last time and wish everyone well and a great afternoon. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you all.